In a city where social divisions were both deep and visible, the fault lines were clearly drawn between different communities. Each neighborhood seemed to have its own universe, that of white middle-class families, residing in the peaceful, impeccably maintained streets, that of residents of working-class neighborhoods, often Black or Latino, where access to education, employment, and quality services was limited. Inequalities were palpable in every corner of the city, and the gap seemed to widen every day between the privileges of some and the daily struggles of others. Jordan was a young man of 22, born and raised in one of these deprived neighborhoods. But unlike many of his friends, he had decided from a very young age to devote himself to study. His objective was clear. He wanted to escape from this poverty which seemed to be an inevitable legacy for many of them. Jordan didn't just dream of a better life. He was actively preparing for it. Every hour of hard work in the library, every excellent grade in his exams, testified to his desire to transcend the limits imposed by his environment. His results at university were exemplary, and he excelled in his law studies, fascinated by the power of justice and the possibility of defending those who, like him, had been marginalized and oppressed. Far from the stereotypical image of the detached and apathetic student, Jordan was deeply engaged in the social struggles that shook his city. He attended community meetings, organized fundraisers for associations, and devoted his free time to activities that strengthened his commitment. His dream was not just to be a lawyer. He wanted to defend the invisible, those whom the system seemed to condemn without ever offering them a real chance. Young men and women in his community, burdened by racial prejudice and stereotypes, often had little hope in a justice system that he believed had already judged and rejected them. The evening that everything changed, Jordan left the library, tired but satisfied to have made significant progress in his research. He used to go home alone, taking advantage of the quiet night to think about his studies and his future. The city, under the glow of the streetlights, seemed calm, almost peaceful. However, this serenity was only apparent. The underlying tensions were everywhere, and Jordan was acutely aware of them. But that evening, he was simply a student returning home after a long day of work, without imagining that the city would have another reality in store for him, a harsh reality that he had known from afar, but never personally. So he was walking quietly, his mind occupied with the next day's classes, when he saw a police patrol car suddenly parked next to him. Two police officers came out, their heavy steps and abrupt gestures betraying a certain impatience, even hostility. They seemed to have already decided on their victim, and Jordan, dressed in his leather jacket and carrying a backpack that betrayed his status as a student, was only a symbol of their distrust. One of the police officers, a young man with short hair, advanced towards Jordan with an authoritarian posture, as if he had the right to intimidate. "You seem like the kind of person who does stupid things around here," he said dismissively, as if he didn't even need any further explanation. Jordan, surprised by the verbal assault, stopped immediately, his mind searching for a calm, collected response. He had seen other young people in his community facing similar situations, but he never believed that he would one day be involved in them. However, the reality was there, striking and brutal. Before he could even respond, the other, older police officer violently grabbed his arm, pulling him towards him with disproportionate force. "Where are you going, man?" he asked in a contemptuous tone, looking Jordan up and down, trying to intimidate him. He didn't really seem interested in Jordan's answer, only in the power he had over him. Jordan, his heart racing, tried to calmly defend himself. "I'm a law student at university," he replied, trying to keep calm despite the rush of adrenaline pounding his temples. "I'm going home." His voice shook slightly, but he refused to give in to fear. He was used to judgments, to contemptuous looks, but this time, he wasn't ready to let his dignity be crushed. "And you think we'll believe you?" the policeman retorted, his eyes hard. "You're here at this hour for no reason."
"It's suspicious. You're going with us."
There was no logic in his words, no legal justification, just a gratuitous accusation, based on deep-rooted racial stereotypes. Jordan tried to protest one last time, explaining that his presence in this neighborhood was in no way suspicious, but his words were lost in the arrogance and violence of the police. In an instant, he found himself pressed against the hood of the police car, his hands handcuffed behind his back. He felt the heat of the metal against his skin, while one of the police officers insulted him, accusing him without proof of thefts that had taken place in the neighborhood. He knew, deep down, that it had nothing to do with him, but with the fact that here he was, a young black man, an ambitious student who dared to defy the expectations of those who thought they knew everything about him. Passers-by, who witnessed the incident, stayed away. Some looked away, probably accustomed to seeing similar scenes, resigned to the reality of injustice. Others, probably too scared, remained silent, not wanting to get in the way of the police. The scene played out like a sight many had seen before, one where the victim didn't stand a chance. But for Jordan, this moment marked the start of a much bigger fight.
Jordans Motter, Clarice Beaufort, was no ordinary woman.
At 45, she embodied dignity and rigor, a respected and feared figure in the city. A high court judge, she was a long-time campaigner against police abuse and racial discrimination. His name, engraved in the corridors of the judicial system, was synonymous with impartial justice and implacable decisions. She had built her career on her flawless integrity, a rare quality in an environment where the temptation to give in to power or external influences was omnipresent. But behind the implacable judge was a woman whose passion and love for her only son, Jordan, was immeasurable. Clarice had raised Jordan alone after her husband's untimely death, a devastating loss that forced her to confront an unjust world with even greater determination. She had passed on to him the values of respect, perseverance, and dignity, teaching him to never lower his head in the face of adversity. These lessons had forged a brilliant and ambitious young man, but also deeply human, faithful to his principles and ready to fight for a fairer world. For Clarice, Jordan was everything. Her treasure, her motivation, her reflection in the world. The idea that he could be treated as a suspect, treated with contempt, was unbearable to him. When she received the call from her lawyer friend, one of the most renowned in the city, announcing her son's arrest, the ground shifted beneath her feet. Although as a judge, she had witnessed dozens, if not hundreds, of similar cases where young black men were victims of discrimination or police violence, the injustice still struck just as hard when it touched her own flesh. Clarice knew that, sooner or later, Jordan might find himself in this situation. But knowing this, and living it, were two very different things. The taxi that was taking her to the police station seemed to drag, each additional second placing a burden on her heart. His thoughts were linked together in a whirlwind. How could they do this? Why did they arrest him? Why him, a law student, a model young man? But there was little room for questions as she rushed into the dark night, her breathing heavy. She thought briefly about how she had raised her son. She had always encouraged him to stand up straight, to show dignity even when the world seemed to want to take away his. It was a golden rule she had instilled in him since childhood. You are bigger than everything they try to make you believe.
Keep your head up.
But that evening, as she went to the police station, a terrible realization hit her. Reality could hit even the most prepared. Arriving at the police station, Clarice felt an icy heat invade her. She didn't even need to introduce herself. His name echoed in the corridors like a legend. The guard on duty, an elderly policeman with features marked by years of service, looked at her with tired eyes. At the sight of Clarice, he turned pale, immediately recognizing the judge. She wasn't just a towering figure in the city, she was an unstoppable force, and her gaze alone was enough to make those who dared to break the law reel. "I'm here for my son," she said in a firm voice, almost inhuman in its calm. "Where is he?" The agent hesitated for a moment, visibly distraught, before leading her without a word to a small room at the back of the police station. The air, despite the ambient heat, seemed heavier, like a sort of presentiment. When she walked through the door, a horrifying vision met her. Jordan, her only son, was there, sitting in a chair, his wrists tied to his arms, his gaze filled with frustration and anger. His clothes were rumpled, and his face, usually serene, bore traces of a humiliation he should never have suffered. The two police officers responsible for his arrest stood in the corner, avoiding his gaze. Clarice didn't need much time to understand what was happening. Her son had been mistreated, humiliated for no reason, and this scene was a pure and simple insult. Her mind raced, but she remained still, struck by a strange inner force. She fixed the police officers with a piercing gaze, crossing her arms over her chest, a natural authority emanating from her. Every movement she made, every word she spoke, was imbued with a power that commanded respect, even fear. She knew, without the slightest doubt, that these men were responsible for this unjustified arrest, and she had no intention of granting them any leniency. "What did you do to my son?" she asked, her voice cold, yet full of the anger of a mother willing to do anything to protect a child. The youngest police officer tried to justify himself, but Clarice did not give him time to express himself further. She took out her cell phone with a speed that surprised even the agent. "I want to see the surveillance camera footage now," she ordered, her voice relentless. There was no room for negotiation. "And I want you to release my son immediately." A few minutes later, Clarice and Antoine found themselves in the commissioner's office. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, charged with tension. The commissioner, an older man with features marked by years of service, sat at his desk, his hands trembling on the polished wooden surface. He was well aware that what he was about to see would change the course of history that night. A surveillance video, filmed in the police station's guardroom, broadcast images of Jordan's violent arrest on a loop. The camera captured every moment. The police, armed with their batons and their excessive authority, pinning Jordan to the ground with incredible brutality. The scene, devoid of any justification, showed police officers insulting him, shouting baseless accusations at him, their apparent rage fueled by racial prejudice. Jordan, already on the ground, was overwhelmed by the injustice, his eyes expressing confusion and pain, but also calm and determined resistance. Clarice, standing straight and implacable next to Antoine, observed every detail of the video without looking away. She felt a wave of dull anger, but also a renewed strength. What she saw was not just her son, it was a reflection of the systematic violence that too many young black men experience daily, in the shadows of society. But that evening, light would be shed on this act, and there would be no escape for those responsible. The commissioner, after observing the images in heavy silence, finally raised his head. His face was pale, the guilt evident. He knew that this incident would highlight a reality that the authorities often tried to cover up, but which could no longer be ignored. He took a deep breath, his eyes fleeing those of Clarice, before addressing her, in a voice that betrayed his discomfort. "I'll take care of it, Madame Beaufort," he says, almost hesitantly, although he tries to maintain some control. "The police officers responsible will be punished." But Clarice did not let herself be appeased by empty words of promise. She knew too well the slowness of the justice system and the ease with which those responsible for abuse were sometimes protected by their status, affiliation, or power. "I don't need promises," she replied firmly, her piercing gaze leaving no room for ambiguity.
"I want immediate action."
"It's not just my son who was humiliated and violated, it's a principle of justice. I want this to be heard, so that this injustice does not go unnoticed." Clarice, far from being satisfied with an isolated promise, knew that she had to make the voice of her son, her family, but also all the invisible victims of police violence heard. She took out her phone, fingers pressing the buttons quickly, and immediately called the local reporters. The press conference she organized left no room for ambiguity. The whole world needed to know what happened that night, and the role of those supposed to protect the population in this abuse of power. The story of Jordan's wrongful arrest, coupled with the shocking video showing the officer's gratuitous violence, spread like wildfire through the media. In less than 24 hours, the case was everywhere. The police officers were suspended from duty with immediate effect. An official investigation was opened, and public pressure skyrocketed. Clarice knew that this case would not only shake the walls of the local police station, but that it would send a powerful message to those who thought they could act without consequence. Under Clarice's watchful eye, the authorities were forced to take drastic measures. The commissioner, reluctantly but compelled by media pressure and growing community support, was forced to review police practices throughout the city. A commission of inquiry was set up to take a closer look at racist and abusive behavior within the public force, and reforms were considered to prevent future excesses of this type. Jordan, although released, struggled to recover from the incident. The weight of public humiliation was heavy, and the invisible scars left by the ordeal extended far beyond his body. But despite everything, he felt a kind of inner liberation. His mother's unwavering support, her courage and her fighting spirit in the face of adversity, had helped him overcome what could have broken him. What had marked him, beyond the physical violence he had suffered, was the solidarity of those who had fought alongside him. The witnesses to the incident, the journalists, and especially his mother, Clarice, who had never left him alone in the face of injustice. Popular support was growing. Protests broke out in several cities, and public figures took a stand for justice, drawing attention to systemic police violence. Clarice and Jordan's story became a symbol of resistance, and their struggle provided momentum for a broader police reform movement in the country. Clarice became the face of this battle, an activist who not only protected her son, but defended a much greater cause, that of human dignity and equal rights. As for Jordan, his experience did not leave him indifferent. His career, already promising, took a new direction. Inspired by his mother's example, he determinedly threw himself into the defense of civil rights, bringing his own fight for justice to every area where it was needed. He decided to study civil law to defend those who, like him, were victims of discrimination and injustice, and to fight against the system that, all too often, crushed the lives of the most vulnerable. The story of Jordan and his mother did not end with a simple victory, but with a mutual commitment to never forget what had been accomplished. Because they knew that, in a world where injustices sometimes seemed eternal, there were still fights to be fought, voices to be heard and changes to be brought about. The system, however powerful it may be, could never erase the impact of this struggle.